With us coming towards the end of the year of 2022, I thought it would be a good idea to put all of the reviews for Jujutsu Kaisen that I've done this year since this channel started into one big master video. Now, the channel did only start in September, which means we will cover chapters 199 right the way through till 207, and it's going to be one big mega juicer video. Now, I'd like to do something like this every year, so this will be the start of a little tradition. Without further ado, here's the big Jujutsu Kaisen 2022 mega review. Enjoy. So chapter 199 of Jujutsu Kaisen just dropped, and it feels like we're finally starting to move forward with the plot after what feels like a couple of weeks of side quests. The chapter opens up with the aftermath of Maki vs Naoya, and she's helping out Noritoshi here, and they end up talking about how Noritoshi basically feels worthless now that he can no longer stand at the top of the Kamo family. We then get some more dialogue between the two, and it basically neatly ties up Maki's almost hyperbolic time chamber arc over the past couple of chapters. I'm very happy that Maki is now at a stage that is now officially recognized that she is on the same level as Toji. It's been speculated for weeks whether Maki would ever be the same as Toji, whether she would grow stronger than Toji. I still personally think that she will grow stronger eventually over time, but I am very, very happy now that Maki's chapter seems to have been tied up nice and neatly, but it also feels like we have more from Noritoshi to still learn, to still grow at, because the final sentence that he has with Maki right here where he says, yeah, the impression that I get from him is that he seems down, beaten, and still not quite sure of himself, not quite convinced that what Maki has told him is the correct way he should be dealing with things, and the advice that she's given he doesn't seem to have taken on board fully. We then switch over to Tokyo No. 1 Colony on November 14th, and we see Angel saying good morning to Megami, and she calls him my fated one. Now, there is no real explanation for this. Megami is looking obviously beaten, bruised, battered for himself, and he asks how long he was asleep, and then he turns away from Angel and says, I'm asking you, Itadori. We finally get to see Itadori, and it turns out that this guy has just been living the life. This boy is in a robe, he's drinking some wine, and he is having a real good time with it. It seems also that our favorite Power Ranger, Takaba, is also here, and he has basically just been out raiding stores, grabbing some food, frozen food, and is also very surprised that there is still electricity running through the colonies, to which Angel explains that it's not an earthquake, there's no reason for the electricity to be shut off on its own. Cursed spirits are more likely to attack humans than they are buildings, and they still have a lot of people remaining in the colony, and that's why they didn't cut off the electricity from the outside. Joshua then says that Takaba-san, you became a player from the outside colony, right? And he's like looking at it a bit clueless while chugging on a beer. She asks him if he did not look at the news before coming in. He says, I'm not really a news person, and then she says, ignorance in an adult is the opposite of bliss, you know, and I think that's quite a funny line. I actually kind of really like that line. It's quite profound. I will say it feels nice to see Yuji back in the panels again. It feels like it's been a really, really long minute since we saw him here, and not that I'm complaining. Seeing all these other characters fighting and having more screen time is very nice, and it's very refreshing, but it's also nice to see our boy Yuji back. It's also nice to see that he is just refreshed. That guy is vibing. He is in a dressing gown, and he's thrilled to be wearing that. He's also drinking wine. He is vibing right now. So Megami then says that he's going to go take a bath, and these guys should all just prepare to tell him on how the hell they are all in the same hotel room and what happened over the past couple of days while he passed out. Yuji then points out that Takaba kind of looks like a Power Ranger, which is why I mentioned that, because I'd never thought about that until this was pointed out. I think Power Rangers in our translation notes right there, which I think is kind of funny. They then point out that they saw Angel carrying Megami after their fight. Yuji makes a reference to, I hope I don't butcher this word, but it says Petrash, I think. The dog from A Dog of Flanders. Little Angel came down to carry the dog on a boy to heaven, where he makes that reference, I guess. I have no idea where that reference came from, so if you know that, let me know in the comments below. Moving in further, they talk about that they are looking for a player called the Angel. And we heard that the Angel is in Tokyo No. 2 Colony. Kurusu, are you the Angel? And if so, did you save me? And why are you in Tokyo No. 1 Colony? Kurusu is looking a bit sheepish here, and then we get the big reveal of the chapter. I am the Angel, but it's not Kurusu saying this. It's a mouth on Kurusu's face, looking almost exactly like Sukuna. And Yuji is almost immediately not shocked by this, but more almost looks kind of happy that it's like him, which feels like the most Yuji thing to happen in this scene, considering Megami and Takaba looked startled that there is a face on her cheek talking to them. So Angel Mouth then says, first I saved you because Hana and you used to, but she doesn't get to finish the sentence, which I find kind of interesting. What is the secret here? What is the big deal here? Everyone looks shocked about it in the room, but no one really sort of talks about it, and I hope that gets addressed at some point. They then go on to talk about, do you need a reason to help someone who's collapsed by the side of the road? Yuji and Takaba, being the lovable idiots that they are, both say, what a good person. Not a thought between their heads that this could be some sort of weird trap or sinister intention. But the hand-face thing, Angel, we'll call it hand-face Angel. Since you're looking for me, it seems you know my curse technique. They then go on to elaborate that the nullification of cursed techniques. Seals and barriers are no exception, so we can enter and exit the colonies at will. We then find out that Angel's goal is to purge all of the incarnated players. She states that it's something that should not be happening and it goes against the laws of gods. Megami then questions God, and she then says, a name given to my creed for simplicity's sake, you can ignore it if you like. It's a very interesting statement to say. It's the implication that God does exist, because if Sukuna is revered as the devil, then that must also imply the existence of a god. So this kind of does make me very intrigued, is if to see there is a higher power, because if cursed spirits do exist in this universe, there's gotta be some sort of higher power, I imagine. The angel then states that that's why they've chosen to coexist with Hana. They then also explain a little bit more in detail about what their curse technique can do. Megami questions, could your curse technique return an incarnated player back to what they were like before the incarnation? Angel then replies, I can't say for sure, but 99% of the time they will die. Incarnation is the fusion of a cursed object and living flesh. And Yuji then thinks to himself, that's why Sukuna will die if I die. She then states that if you wanted to return someone to their original state, and if so, I'm sorry, I don't think I could help you with that. They then get to the part of what they need Angel to break, and it is the special grade cursed prison realm. We all know it's what's holding Gojo right now. Angel then agrees that if it's the seal of a cursed object, then it's completely fine. Megami and Yuji share this wholesome little fist bump, and I'm really for it. Finally, things starting to look on the up for Yuji and Megami right here. And then even Megami starts to think to himself, it's all going well. We can revive Gojo Sensei this way, and it's almost scary how smoothly things have gone. He's speaking too soon, brother. It's almost as if Gege is in our minds and knows that we are so desperate to see Gojo be revived so we can see more of that man on the screen. Even though we've had so much of him already, he knows that's what we're after, and he knows that by teasing us we're going to get more and more excited, and it feels now that we're starting to build up towards the end game of this arc of freeing Gojo so we can see more of that man on screen. Angel then says, first you need to help us, and then I'll break the seal on the prison realm. Of course, it's never ever going to be that easy. Megami then says, don't tell me you want us to kill all the incarnated players, to which Angel responds, I'm not nearly so demanding. There's just one among the incarnated players that I must slaughter, no matter the cost, and that is the Fallen. If we can kill this player, then I can guarantee you of my assistance. We then cut to Yuji looking real shocked, zooming into his eyeballs, and then all of a sudden we are in the domain of none other than Sukuna himself. The first time I'm pretty sure we've seen him since the Tokyo incident in Shibuya. He says to Yuji, just looking at your face makes me sick. Ha, I figured out I'd say it before some idiot slips up and lets the cat out of the bag. Yuji looking really confused, and then we get the grand reveal of the chapter. I am the Fallen. Sukuna himself reveals that he is the Fallen. Things are now divulging into chaos. What a chapter this has been so far, and I feel like we are really starting to set up an endgame now. The next chapter, chapter 200, I feel is going to be a big one, and I am super stoked to see this. Let me know in the comments below what you guys thought of this chapter. Overall, I thought this chapter was possibly a very dialogue heavy chapter, or overall possibly one of the best chapters that I've read from Jujutsu in a little minute. Considering it was so dialogue heavy, what we got here is massive, and I'm very happy and excited to see the future of this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Much love, appreciate you.
So the new chapter is here, and what I theorized in a previous video about us going to war potentially seemingly might be true here. This chapter seems to feel like we are pivoting more from the Culling Games arc now and starting to transition into a new arc with the information that is revealed to us in this chapter. So the chapter picks off last where we left, with Sukuna revealing to Yuji that he is actually the Fallen or the Disgraced One, depending on the translation. I've noticed that depending on the translation of which chapters that you're reading, it either says Fallen One or Disgraced One, so I'm not sure which one is the official one, but either way, the chapter picks off with Sukuna revealing that to Yuji, and then it obviously startles Megami a little bit because
Yuji looks visibly shaken by this revelation. We then get the sequence of Yuji trying to explain to Megami that he is actually the Fallen One without actually saying it. He's basically performing the Ginyu Squad's performances and their poses right here to convey that he is housing Sukuna's, and Sukuna is the fallen or the disgraced one in the way of interpreting dance. Then see that the penny finally drops with Megami, actually realizing what Yuji means as soon as Uni slicks back his hair to look almost identical to Sukuna. Then get this segment of Megami finally piecing it together and what Yuji means, and he also realizes and comes to the conclusion that if Sukuna has kept this secret for so long, then it must be because Angel has an ability that can permanently annihilate Sukuna without any room for resurrection, and that's too big of a power to let just slip through their hands right now. We then get this next panel that is in reference to what I said in my previous video about just how the effects of the Shibuya incident has affected Yuji. Yuji will willingly and gladly die if it means that Sukuna is erased off the face of this earth, and he even states that it is a cheap price to pay. Personally, wouldn't like to see Yuji throw his life away for this purpose. I would like to see there be some other workaround for this and some maybe plot hole for it, because I'm biased and I don't think Jujutsu Kaisen would be the same without Yuji, but also at the same time it's also shown that it can run without Yuji. Even though he is the main premise of the series, it's shown that a lot of these characters can carry the series on its back pretty fine. So remember at the beginning of the video when I said that I think we're heading into all-out war here, and I think that we are shifting away from the Culling games? This is why. It turns out that there is a high number of players all of a sudden entering, and we are made aware of this by Angel all of a sudden saying that's odd, and she is saying that there's an astonishing number of people entering the colony right now. Remember how in my spoiler video I said that I think that the US is going to invade the Culling games to try and abduct the Japanese players for whatever nefarious purposes that they might have? It's looking like it might be a true thing here, because there's a large amount of players that have entered it, and in the next few panels it's made even more clear as to why these players might actually just be here. We then cut to a sequence with Kenjaku sitting around with world leaders, seemingly in the White House, explaining the properties of cursed energy and how these phenomenons happen and how regular humans perceive them. And he's explaining that these are basically an energy source, which obviously for the American resident is an eye-opener. Then see a scene where Kenjaku and his assistants is basically handing all of these officials in the White House these specialized cursed glasses, and it shows them basically everything. It lets them see all of the cursed spirits, it lets them see everything. Kenjaku then releases a small amount of cursed spirits into the White House to show them everything. This is where we are then introduced to Cyrus Vale, who exclaims that this is a gold mine, and if we miss out, it's likely we will fall behind the rest of the world. He's hinting at using these Jujutsu sorcerers and cursed energy as a renewable energy source. Yep, that's right. It's looking like, as I theorized in the previous video, that these players entering the Culling games right now is actually the US military or the US sorcerers, I can only assume. My theory about Cyrus right now is that he is already aware of cursed energy. He doesn't seem shocked by cursed energy. He's actually ridiculously calm when he's witnessed these cursed spirits come out from Kenjaku, and it's likely on my theory here that Cyrus is actually a sorcerer, and he's probably, even though it says environmental management, it's most likely that this man is also a double agent and is most likely working with Kenjaku. That's my theory on this. Kenjaku then shows these officials footage from none other than Mekamaru, but he doesn't even bother to name Mekamaru. He literally just says from a puppeteer who used the puppet manipulation technique, and it was recorded through his eyes basically. This is a reference to when Mekamaru says that he sees everything in his fight with Mahito. But again, as I want to point out here, as the president and these officials are being shown footage of Gojo, Sukuna, Mahito, Todo, all these other people, all these key moments, they're basically being shown a highlight reel of everything cool and badass that's happened within Jujutsu Kaisen so far. Look who is being highlighted underneath this footage, and look who is startlingly calm to watching Gojo flying in the sky, Sukuna, a demon, looking at Todo, looking at Yuji. Look at all these people that he's being shown, and look how calm Cyrus is while watching all of this. He then finally speaks up and says to the president, "Do you get it yet, Mr. President? Cursed energy is an energy source. Petroleum, natural gases, or what we call fossil fuels, solar, wind, geothermal, and the like are all considered renewable energy, but cursed energy is the most pure energy source there is. And then he makes a point of pointing out gojo, which further lends credibility to my claim that Cyrus knows more than he's letting on. Why out of all of these sorcerers, without any other prior information, would he point out specifically gojo? And then he makes a bombshell statement of that guy could probably power a country, and that right there makes me wonder that if gojo is confirmed that Yuta has more cursed energy than gojo, and gojo is theorized by Cyrus to power a country, how big on the powering scale could Yuta be right now if that's where gojo stands? With all this information being revealed to the president, the chapter ends with Kenjaku basically giving him sort of a deal, and it seems like it's a deal that's too good to take in the eyes of a president. He basically says that in November, Tokyo will come to a standstill, and what is essentially an extraterrestrial ground Jujutsu sorcerers will gather for a ritual. He's referring to the Culling games right here. So when I was theorizing in a previous video that we don't know whether this is in the past or if this is in the present, it turns out that this is in the past, and this is all Kenjaku's plan. The players that are entering the Culling games right now are most likely going to be the US military, and it seems that it was all set up that way for Kenjaku to get all the sorcerers possible into one potential area to start basically a war. It looks like we're heading to war right now. In the final page, we see that the president seems quite stressed, and he's saying, are you saying that we should just kidnap Japanese civilians to use as samples for experiments? And then the caption is a worrying proposal on what choices could these global superpowers make. But if I'm honest, this seems like a kind of anticlimactic cliffhanger, because it seems like we've already seen this decision being made. It is more than likely that these 807 players entering the Culling games right now into the colonies are actually the US military, or my other theory is that they are actually secret Jujutsu sorcerers from America that are being trained by Cyrus. But that's the chapter of 200. It was a big one. It looks like we're in a massive turning point for Jujutsu Kaisen right now. I'm super excited to see what 201 brings us. So the new chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen 201 is finally here. It's titled Direct Negotiations, and it picks up where we left in the last chapter, with Kenjaku basically negotiating with the president in order to invade the Culling games and have the American soldiers basically kidnap Japanese sorcerers in exchange for Cyrus to complete experiments on them. President and Cyrus seem to get into a bit of an argument about this, and Cyrus argues that we're talking about self-sustaining energy. If this becomes a reality, imagine how many problems we can solve. The difference between sorcerer and us, non-sorcerers, lies in the brain. The sheer uncharted mystery of the brain that remains unsolved even with modern science and technology. And then he goes on to say that we need a lot of samples for experiments, to which the president obviously objects, and he states that you don't just want me to kidnap them, you want me to kidnap them for human experimentation. Cyrus then sort of defends himself by saying we can't fall behind China and Russia on alternative energy. Like I said in previous videos now, I am really unsure on Cyrus. I think there is a lot more to Cyrus than meets the eye right now. Even though he's feigning that he wants to protect America and kidnap these sorcerers for the greater good to basically win the energy race basically between all these other countries, he then starts to try and back up his point by saying, you know, it's not just the two countries, we can't fall behind China and Russia, we've got Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, Germany, countries with a high military power like France, India, Korea and Turkey. If India moves, Pakistan will follow. Don't you get it? This is a cascading problem. We then have this little panel here that says it isn't kidnapping, this is protection. I like the way that the kidnapping and protection are put in quotes. JJK has really made Cyrus look like this very sinister, evil scientist who is got his mind twisted and thinks that his actions and what monstrosities basically that he's willing to commit are basically for the greater good of the people.
And every action I take, no matter how violent or how cruel, is for the greater good of my people.
We then have Kenjaku intervene here and says, yes, I also believe this is the most humane option. This dude is obviously going to say this to try and get the president on board. We then get this nice little panel saying that this man is negotiating with the United States in secret, but depending on how this turns out, he might cooperate with other countries as well. And Kenjaku, I'm assuming, either hears this or has some sort of technique available to hear this, because he basically replies in his mind saying, we already are. As we saw in the flashback panels, he's already negotiated with multiple world leaders. So the 800 people that we've seen entering the colony only in the past couple of chapters. There could be more. Those are 800 just from America. There could be more on their way from other countries to invade the Culling games here. It also just goes to show how devious Kenjaku is when he says that we already are. Like, he's fully aware that he is playing almost every major superpower in the world against each other right now by setting them up to invade the Culling games here. We then get into this panel here that says Jujutsu sorcerers are a minority of the population, and in November a great number of them will gather together in one place. This opportunity will not happen twice. And then the president sort of agrees and is coming round to it. You can see him looking kind of really bothered by this, but also is sort of realizing that he can sort of solve an energy crisis here. He says that we must increase surveillance on Japan towns, which I'm assuming he is referring to towns in the US, because he later on says there are Japanese people in our country too. You can see him looking very, very bothered by this whole situation here. He has a feeling, and you can tell that he's being manipulated and is very skeptical of Kenjaku and what Kenjaku can do. We then see this panel of the president sort of analysing his options here, and he says, if this Suguru Geto guy negotiates with other countries, those people may become targets, so we should at least protect our own citizens. And then he refers to Lieutenant Gary, who is our new military commander who's just entered the fray here. But I'm also kind of confused by this panel because he's referring to Suguru Geto as if they're not in the same room, but in the previous panel we see them sat together, so I don't know if they shifted rooms here for a split second. I don't know if they're moving in and out of rooms. It's not very made clear here. It did confuse me a little bit, but I'm going to assume and work off the basis that they are in the same room, and the president is just giving no respect to Suguru here. We then get a formal introduction to Gary K. Johnson, which I must say is a very, very American name. That's a very military name right there. He says, are you saying that the plan to kidnap these so-called Jujutsu sorcerers should be left to our army? And then the president again is sort of definitely in and out of this by, you know, waving his hand, and he says, don't make me say it out loud, even I think it's disgusting. And then Gary also feeds into this typical meathead soldier vibe that he gets going. He goes, my apologies, but I'm a professional soldier and I need an explicit command. He then turns to Kenjaku and says, it seems like that white-haired guy is abnormal even for a sorcerer. Kenjaku then responds, yes, just as you said, he is an abnormality, but in November he will be sealed away. In a previous video I said that I wasn't sure on the timing on here, but I've just only realized that I was actually being an idiot in the previous videos. November is actually coming before October in what they've done. The Culling games held a little bit after Gojo was sealed in October, so this is the November before the Culling games, but I was really confused, but I wanted to clear that up. We then get this scene where Gary says in that case a single company will be enough, and Kenjaku sort of stares at him because a single company could be anywhere between around 60 to 200 soldiers according to the translation notes right there, and he says that we'll be advancing from Yokota Air Base using its deployment schedule, and asks Cyrus if 5 dozen sorcerers is enough, and Cyrus looking very excited saying, yeah, sure, that's enough. Again, I still do not trust Cyrus. There is still something about Cyrus that I just do not trust, and the more screen time, more panel time he gets, the more my theory seems very reasonable. We then get to this little segment here where Gary says they might not have ESP or whatnot, but in the end they're just untrained amateurs. They are no match for our army. Muscles and bullets. And then he goes on to say nothing beats those, which I think is kind of funny. Kenjaku then says, yeah, I mostly agree with that. Even in a battle between sorcerers, the deciding factor is ultimately the strength of the body. And then Gary is almost sort of like, told you, see, muscles, bullets, hoorah, Marines, you know? Then Kenjaku, looking very sinister, says, but you'll need at least 800 people, a full battalion. Now, this is interesting. Why does he specify this? To me is, maybe it's part of Kenjaku's plan, maybe he needs a certain amount of people within the Culling games and the barriers there that are set up, but he specifically requests at least 800, which is a really weird number for him to suggest. Gary then goes on, just like the stereotypes, the Japanese are worrywarts and wimps. Is it because mommy never gave them a gun? Which, I've got to be honest, Gege's writing of Gary here is the most stereotypical Marine dude that you could think of ever. He is the epitome of, hoorah, let's go Marines, get them guns, you know what I say? And then Urami sort of interjects here and she says, then why don't you test it out? And then Kenjaku also basically convinces Gary to sort of, I don't know, test out their abilities. He says, that's true. It so happens that there are 2 sorcerers right here. If someone's negotiating directly with the president, there's no way you'd only station the 15 soldiers outside, right? And then we sort of, I'm assuming we switch panels here, and this is like what I'm assuming is a military drill inside of the White House with the soldiers against Kenjaku and Urami, which is crazy. We then get Gary saying that, you know, the Oval Office is currently guarded by the most elite Secret Service agents. The counter assault team, CAT, which I thought was quite a funny name, 15 soldiers, all equipped with bulletproof armor and rifles. Just like he said, that's not all. We also have Central Intelligence Agencies, CIA, Paramilitary Division, the Special Activities Center, SAC, which I'm just gonna giggle because sack. And then he also says the world's greatest covert operations group, and all members have 8 or more years of experience in military and special ops training. Then the director of national intelligence says that should have been my line, getting a bit salty because Gary's basically taking all the oorah stuff here, you know what I'm saying? Then Gary says that they're going to split the operatives into 3 teams along with the Secret Service. There are 45 elites stopping Suguru Geto's movements, and it then shows us a little map of the East Wing with Gary chilling in East Wing and Geto sat there in the Oval Office in the West Wing, and he has to make it to the East Wing to here, or from the West Wing to the East Wing. Then we see Geto say, I guess it's time to start, so I'm assuming that this is basically a military drill right here to show the president what 2 sorcerers, or even just 1, can do against a battalion and prove his point as to why he needs 800 people. We then get to see this very cliche scene between the general and the president, and he says that all of the non-combatants have been evacuated, so permission to open fire has been granted. Mr. President, we will end this without you ever having to see their faces. And then the president is obviously furious because his wife and he lives there. And then Gary then says the Japanese should stick to making cars and anime, which is mildly racist, I imagine. Anyway, the president then says, but Lieutenant Gary, is this really necessary? Like, we can't do it more humanely? And he says, no, Mr. President. What we are seeking here is not just a victory, but overwhelming victory. And then we get this close-up of a bicep. Now, I'm curious because we haven't seen a full body of Gary here, but is this Gary's bicep? Did Gary just pull out his own bicep? I have so many questions about that little panel, or is that just a metaphorical American bicep there? I don't know. But then as Gary says, this is America. Huge song. Love that song by Childish Gambino right there. We then see a body drop down behind him, and Gary is obviously crazy. What is going on? Runs outside, and he sees soldiers fallen from the sky. Literally fallen from the sky. I'm not sure whether they are dead or not, but I'm going to assume that the height that they're fallen, they are very injured or dead, depending on how they fell. We then see this massive shikigami that is almost elephant-like, and it seems to be praying while these soldiers are being dropped from the sky. In the panels, I'm pretty sure that none of them still have their glasses on, so they can't even see what's going on. They just see the soldiers are being dropped from the sky. Then we see Gary put on his glasses here, so he has no idea until he puts those glasses on, and then he sees the massive shikigami sat on top of the White House praying. We then see a bunch of dog tags drop into the floor, and Suguru Geto appears. He says, do you get it now, Mr. President? Then let's wrap up this meeting, and it's time to hunt some Jujutsu sorcerers. And it then cuts to our guys, Angel, Megami, and Yuji, along with our favorite Power Ranger dude, and it says, thus, just what has been released into the colony. What a chapter. The chapter has left us on a cliffhanger. Well, I think it's a cliffhanger anyway, purely because we see that these guys are all running, but we don't actually know what they're running from. We don't know if the soldiers have appeared or not, so it's quite interesting.
So the new chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen 202 is here, and boy, is it a juicy one. Not only do we get to see more of this guy, we also get to see more of her. And also, this dude is back, and he's causing havoc again. So without further ado, let's get into the video. But before that, also, make sure to like and subscribe, as it really does help me out. Appreciate you. So the chapter opens up with none other than Amanai Riko. From 12 years ago, he was the former star plasma vessel that was killed by Toji, who was supposed to merge with Tengen. And you get to see Yuki asking Tengen with a really no other star plasma vessels besides Amanai Riko 12 years ago. Aside from me, of course. Just none with as much potential as Amanai Riko. So you're saying there were others. And this is a discussion between Tengen and Yuki, and we get to see why Yuki wanted to stay with Tengen, because we learn that she's actually a star plasma vessel, which is a wild development. And if you saw my spoiler video, you knew this was coming, but this, for the OG readers right now, is a absolutely wild development. So the conversation carries on, and Yuki asks Tengen, why take such a risk to reject the merger? And Tengen responds with, I didn't reject it so much as accept reality. Merging with the star plasma vessel would only reset my immortal body and halt the evolution brought on by the simple passage of time. There's no guarantee I wouldn't become a blight for humanity if I evolved, but even if the merger failed and my ego spread beyond my body, at the end of my evolution, I would be able to preserve my rationality with a barrier technique like this. It wasn't that I was confident, just like how the seasons are naturally changing, I thought that it was inevitable for something like this to eventually happen. We then see Yuki pour some tea and stare down Tengen, getting really angry, saying, are you kidding me? Making children bear the weight of their karma and then using their history is what you call rational, and then when you fail, you can just say, well, it was okay not to merge. If that's what you call rationality, then you may as well call me the great sage and worship me, you shitty old geezer. I understand Yuki is getting quite angry because obviously she's a former star plasma vessel here, so she obviously feels sympathy for the people who have died for Tengen's cause when she wants to break away from Kirsten
energy. She probably sees it as a pointless endeavor. Then we get this weird development where Master Tengen says, gender no longer matters to me, but technically speaking, I'd be a granny. So Master Tengen is a she. The more we know. We then learn that Yuki can actually hear the former voices of the Star Plasma vessels here, and Tengen asks, what are they saying? To which Yuki says, if I told you what happened to the Star Plasma vessels that merged with you, no matter if it was good or bad, you'd use your age to justify your passiveness, and then you'd pretend to come to some kind of enlightened conclusion, right? Then she says, I won't make it easy for you. That is my responsibility as a former Star Plasma vessel. And then we see Tengen say, I would have liked to talk with you a little longer, but then the panel cuts away to none other than Kenjaku. Now this makes me think that Tengen is actually kind of aware Kenjaku is breaking through the barrier, so I can only assume that Tengen knows that Kenjaku has arrived here. But this also kind of gives me a bit of foreshadowing here, because obviously we learned that Kenjaku can basically absorb Tengen with his cursed manipulation technique, because Tengen is more cursed than he is human, or she is human. Kind of gives me dark foreshadowing vibes here, and I honestly don't think Tengen is going to be around for much longer, if I'm honest here. It's at this point we get to see none other than Kenjaku breaking through the barrier, proclaiming you've outlived your usefulness, to an unamused Choso. Choso replies with, I'm not sure if this counts as interest, but I have this strange urge to kill you. Kenjaku, looking unamused, where's Tengen? Choso replies with, that talking thumb doesn't want to see you. I guess you're not well liked. Kenjaku replying with, then I suppose you're disposable fodder. Please do try your best. The Culling game has already served its purpose. The preparations for the merger of all non-sorcerers in Japan have ended. We then see obviously Choso looking visibly shocked and confused. What happened? Are Yuji and the others okay? Obviously the last time we saw them, the Culling games was being invaded by unknown armies, so we have no idea of the events that transpired since then. And for better or worse, this series is about to blow up. Kenjaku, then being the absolute showman that he is, decides he's going to take Choso to the movies, and he shows Choso a slideshow, basically, of what he thinks might happen when he merges with Tengen here. I also find it very funny that in the past couple of times that we've seen Kenjaku, he's just casually showing off slideshows and little movies. Like, the dude really likes being dramatic when he's showing off his plans to people, and I kind of like that. It kind of makes Kenjaku a very lovable villain. I'm kind of on board with that. But then we see Kenjaku explaining to Choso there, but if you ask me, that's just a step before the merger, a verification process from the Culling game essentially. I've said before that unlike her, what I want isn't a world without cursed spirits, but I was surprised when she was worried about the Japanese being used as a cursed energy resource, or rather it made me happy the way she thinks is close to my own. Anyways, I've gotten off topic. We then see him moving on that from the beginning I worked alongside with sorcerers, even while considering the potential of cursed spirits. Perhaps a new form of cursed energy could be born from advancing cursed spirits to a higher level. He then turns to Choso and says, so I had high hopes for half-breeds between cursed spirits and humans like yourself, and then he says, how disappointing, you were all too ordinary. Choso then literally threatens him, so I respect it. I'm also enjoying this sort of dialogue between the two, because they were at one point allies. They helped each other seal Gojo, so it's kind of interesting seeing these two on the opposite sides of the coin now. We then see Kenjaku further talking about, after evolving, Tengen will be more like a cursed spirit than a human, so if all the non-sorcerers in Japan were to merge with Tengen, I think it'll be similar to a cursed spirit bearing the cursed spirit of 100 million people. Maybe it's like Uzumaki, but it's even capable of extracting something, and we get to see these images in the background of this, and I'm assuming that this is a representation of what Kenjaku thinks is going to happen, but we see a bunch of these Japanese people merging into one entity. We see hands everywhere, we see arms, legs, slight variations of what it looks like teeth there, until eventually we see this massive, what I can only describe is Eren Yeager-like colossal titan above the city of Japan here. And he goes on to say, I wonder what it will look like. Right now I feel like a kid holding a crayon in front of a blank piece of paper. I love that Kenjaku is being painted in this way of, he's just an artist, he's like a crazy scientist, he just wants to see how far this stuff can go. Kenjaku then, they sort of like leave the projector room. I'm assuming that there was a small domain cached by Kenjaku, and if so, that's kind of funny that he's a domain for projectors, which I don't know how that's explained, but it seems what it's looking like. We then get this little conversation further between Choso and Kenjaku, where Choso says, what exactly do you want? Kenjaku, did you not understand anything I just said? Choso then says, no, I'm asking you, what do you get from this? What is it that motivates you. And then Kenjaku, being the absolute crazy psychopath he is, then says, my interest. I just think it will be interesting, but I won't know for sure until it happens. On top of that, what if the cursed accumulated energy looks like a clown face? I'd probably laugh. And then we see Choso firing a piercing blood at Kenjaku, and I'm going to assume that the next chapter in 203, Kenjaku and Choso are going to fight it out. And I'm going to be honest, as much as I want Choso to win this, and Choso's a powerful user, I just can't see him winning this. I genuinely think this is GG for Choso right here.
Massive, big boy chapter here from chapter 203. We get to see Choso fighting Kenjaku here, and we also get to see the special grades and what makes a special grade finally said out loud and finally clarified for us here. Because for the longest time, we've just saw special grades and just assumed that these are these superhuman powerhouses. We don't really know what puts them above grade 1 into special grade. Finally get clarification on it today. My name's Andy, or Dynamic Weeb, and if you like this video, make sure to subscribe. But without further ado, let's get into the review. This is a big boy chapter here. So the chapter opens up with this little memory flashback with Choso speaking to Yuki. As we saw in the last chapter, Choso had just unleashed a piercing blood to attack Kenjaku. We see that Choso wants to face Kenjaku alone, and Yuki says that you will die if you do this. With Choso then replying, so you'd rather the two of us fight Kamo Noritoshi together? Wouldn't we just get in each other's way? So let me go out first, I'll figure out what curse spirits he has, or some information about his curse technique, and then you can follow up. That's our best option here. Choso then says, if I can get him to use his domain. Yuki then saying, let me say it again, you will die here. Choso then arguing back with, it doesn't matter as long as he dies, for the sake of my mother's curse, which makes up half of me and my brothers. And also, Yuki then interjects, saying right after the domain expansion, he'll be in a state where it's hard to use his curse technique. She can ambush him then. The pair of them agree. This is a nice little interesting exchange here to know that they are actually planning out the defenses here to fight Kenjaku, and they're giving him respect because they know just how powerful this dude is. But in the next couple of panels, we go back to where we left off in the last chapter with the piercing blood almost hitting Kenjaku. Kenjaku focuses almost. It kind of looks like he is shocked, but Kenjaku focuses and then just effortlessly dodges it, sending a cursed spirit that looks, again, like Onyx, wrapping around his piercing blood straight over towards Choso. Choso caves. What it looks like, Choso caves the piercing blood, redirecting the cursed spirit and eviscerating most of the area in front of him here. Kenjaku then just decides, F it, I'm gonna become a surfer boy. Starts surfing on a rock with another rock in his hand and is ready to throw this rock at Choso. Choso's saying, you're underestimating me too much, and Kenjaku replies with, do I? Before we see a bunch more of cursed spirits exploding from behind the rock here. Choso then uses a supernova to eviscerate these cursed spirits flying at him. Man, I have to say, by the way, these cursed spirits kind of look like the gingerbread man from Shrek. Choso uses the supernova attack there and then has to shield from the explosion of his own attack here. Geto taking full advantage of this and curving round to the left side of Choso to then warp and throw hands with Choso. Choso then has another supernova attack literally just under the right side of Kenjaku's arm here. He explodes this attack and then demands that Kenjaku answer him. What do you want to do with Yuji? He's not like us who you abandoned for 150 years. You must have a plan for him. Kenjaku then responds with, I don't really have a concrete plan for that thing. I also find it very interesting here how he refers to it as a thing. He doesn't view these people as cases or spirits or humans, it's just a thing. He then goes on to say, I guess if I had to say, then he's just a vessel. And that role's finished now though. Itadori Yuji was merely the smoke signal that set things off. As long as that thing continues to coexist with Sukuna, the cycle of cases will never end and he will become the Eye of the Storm for a new era. Choso then getting even more annoyed, firing a piercing blood at Kenjaku. Again, Kenjaku looking mildly uninterested by this, dodges it effortlessly, and he says, as long as Yuji continues to exist. Wrong. It's as long as you continue to exist, Kamo Noritoshi. You are the source of all of this misfortune, and definitely not Yuji here. Lots of things to break down in this little monologue here from Kenjaku, and one of the most important things that I think has come across in this little speech that he's give here is that his role is finished now, which makes me really curious as to what's happening inside of the Culling games right now. What's happening inside
inside of those fields, because if that role's finished and Kenjaku has appeared here, what is happening inside the Culling games? What has happened to Yuji for him to say that that role is finished? We could possibly switch back to Yuji and see him fully switched over to Sukuna. Lots of questions, and again, Kenjaku is being very secretive and mysterious about this, and I just want answers, bro. That's all I want in my life right now. Moving swiftly on, we see that Choso has been ensnared by some low-level cases that Kenjaku has been secretly slithering underneath the panels that they're standing on. Choso then realizes this and says he has cursed spirits crawled out from under, and it's at this point Kenjaku lands a massive hit on Choso here, absolutely eviscerating him, saying, I know you're just a vanguard. You're just trying to reveal even a little of my curse technique for Tsukumo Yuki, right? Unfortunately, I only plan on using my cursed spirit manipulation for you. With the low-grade curse spirits at that, or rather, there's simply no need to do more than that, because all of you are just failures. What do you even know of my brothers? Choso screams while under the foot of Kenjaku. Kenjaku then replying with, oh sorry, did I hurt your feelings? I looked forward to you so much, and yet you disappointed me so. Maybe you can be proud of yourself for making me talk this much. We then get this really interesting panel here where Choso grabs Kenjaku's foot, and it's specifically highlighted for some reason that Choso is shocked by something, he realizes something. His hand is outlined here for a specific reason, and Kenjaku also looks a bit sort of shocked by this. It makes me wonder what it is that's going on here. What has Choso felt? Maybe because Choso is a curse womb death painting, maybe making physical contact like this with Kenjaku has maybe triggered something inside of him. I don't know, but this seemed a bit too deliberate for it to be just ignored as a little detail. It could just be a little detail, but it did seem way too deliberate for it to be just here for no reason. We then see Kenjaku launching Cursed Spirit again at Choso, and I have to point out that this Cursed Spirit does look a lot like the Cursed Spirit that we saw in the previous chapter. That massive centipede looking thing that we saw that was looming over Japan, it looks very, very similar to that. This is where we see Kenjaku say, do you know what it means to be a special grade sorcerer? As Choso's being launched through the air by this Cursed Spirit. He then says, and it's in quotation marks, someone who can overthrow a country single-handedly, while Choso is on the floor, battered. It also looks like his arm is messed up, like his left arm there is absolutely obliterated on the floor here, and I want to come back to this point in a second. But then Kenjaku then goes on to say that Gojo obviously qualifies, Geto too, because cursed spirit manipulation could produce an entire army of monsters. Many hands make light work, I think that's how the saying goes, and even if they're just low-grade spirits, after enchanting them with my cursed energy, swarming them and giving them orders, they can even take out grade 1 sorcerers on your level. This little segment here where he says someone who can overthrow a country single-handedly is absolutely massive to the development of special grade sorcerers. There has been so many theories about why so many other sorcerers in the series can be special grade, or what makes them grade 1, or what makes them eligible to be special grade, but now we finally know what makes them special grade, because Yuta could easily wipe out an entire country by himself with his cursed copy technique, plus Rika can give him unlimited cursed energy for 5 minutes straight, and I imagine that however long Yuta starts to train this ability, much like Gojo's Infinity, he will get better, and the timing for that could be way, way longer until eventually he ends up like Gojo, where he has a permanent supply of cursed energy flowing from Rika into him, running around the clock. Then we have Gojo. We don't even need to explain this dude. Then we obviously have Geto, as he explains, an army of cursed spirits reinforced with his own cursed energy here. And those are just 3 special grades right there. We then still have Yuki Tsukumo, who hasn't even revealed her cursed technique yet. We know nothing about her. This is very interesting scaling from Gege here to finally clarify what makes someone a special grade. So all the guys who are big fans of Hikari, as much as I love Hikari, I don't think Hikari could wipe out a country single-handedly. And I don't think Todo could, I don't think Nanami could, all these other players that people have theorized that could potentially be special grades, I don't think those people could do that, personally. We then see Tengen speaking to Yuki, where he says her name, and she says no, not yet. I'm assuming that here Yuki is watching from afar, or Tengen and both of them are watching from afar and assessing the situation here. We then get this internal monologue here from Choso. It says, I have failed as an older brother, protecting my brothers and bearing their burdens, becoming their role model. That's what it means to be Oni-chan. And then he flashes back to when Kenjaku said, I'm fascinated in the last chapter, and he says, I am not at all fascinating. Even facing this piece of shit father. I can't land a single hit on him, but I cannot let you say that my brothers aren't fascinating. Which is then we see a massive eruption of blood arising from Choso here. And he says, Death Payton brothers, please lend me your strength. And then he screams fire. And I want to point out that a couple of panels ago, Choso was on the floor, badly injured, and his arm was mangled. So it looks like. But in this, his arm's back to normal and he is screaming, and there is more sort of Payton on his face here. There is a lot of power surging from Choso right now, and it even shocks Kenjaku. It looks like the next chapter here, we're going to see just what a Curse Womb Death Payton can finally do. I want to say no main expansion, or like maybe more maximum technique, something shocking that is going to pull Kenjaku off guard. Choso's got to have been confident in his abilities to fight and push Kenjaku to the limit for him to have offered this. There's no way he would just go absolutely throw it all away without the confidence of being able to do this. I can't wait for the next chapter. Chapter 204 cannot come fast enough because this is going to be a banger of a chapter. This chapter overall was massive. Lots and lots of lore and scaling and just little miniature bombshells that just making the series elevate right now. We are truly coming to the peak and the climax of the Culling games here. If I'm honest, I would even say that we have potentially entered the new arc here with this chapter here.
Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 204 is finally here, Blood and Oil part 3. And it opens up showing us 3 hands on Choso's back here with the caption, with no hope for life, but every hope for his brother. The perfect warmth to support the heart is. And then it's shown to us that Choso is being spiritually pushed by none other than Iso, Kechizo, and Yuji, all cheering him on, saying that you can do it. We see Choso tearing up here with a stiff upper lip, and then all of a sudden he starts screaming, yeah, leave it to me, summoning a piercing blood in his hand and once again attacking Kenjaku here. Kenjaku, again, smugly and nonchalantly stood there saying piercing blood is fastest at its start, so if I dodge it the first time, no matter how you correct its course, I have nothing to be afraid of. Effortlessly dodging the piercing blood, and then he jumps into the air and is just elegantly floating above all the chaos and destruction down below. And honestly, this is a really cool shot of Kenjaku here. There aren't many cool shots of Kenjaku, but this I really like. As Kenjaku lands to the floor, Choso curves the piercing blood around to try and catch Kenjaku off guard here, and Kenjaku notes that this is Iso's technique here, summoning a cursed spirit and just hopping on that bad boy to fly away. He lets the cursed spirit tank the attack while he drops down again on one of those miniature cloud spirits that he has, and we see Choso sprinting towards Kenjaku with the title Wing King. Now this is in reference to Iso's technique Wing King, where we saw back in the day where Iso was fighting Yuji, where Iso had basically created these massive wings out of blood out of his back here, and we see Choso basically doing the same here. It's an imitation technique basically. Kenjaku and Choso catching up with each other and throwing hands here, and Kenjaku makes the comment that this is just a mere imitation, as again he summons another cursed spirit to tank the attacks that Choso launches at him from his Wing King. Choso then notes that because of the way the cursed spirits disappear, it's like a smoke screen, which gives Kenjaku the advantage. Kenjaku, wasting no time, launches 3 more onyx-like looking cursed spirits at Choso, and Choso tanks the attacks. 2 of them hitting his forearms and 1 hitting his midsection there. The one that hits his midsection almost looks like the cursed spirit that one-shot him in the last chapter, but we see Choso getting cut up badly by this here, and then eventually is able to destroy the cursed spirits with his own blood. We then see Kenjaku nonchalantly chilling on this tree here, and he says, once you imbue tracking into a skill, it can't be as fast as piercing blood. As I'm your parent, I'm not affected by poison in your blood. But I do want to point out here that he says imbue tracking into a skill, it can't be as fast as piercing blood, and tracking is put in quotation marks here, and it makes me wonder if Kenjaku found a way to have techniques basically become self-autonomous and track their opponent off their own volition, because we know that Choso has to control his own techniques. So I wonder if Kenjaku found a way, maybe through curse manipulation, to imbue tracking, as he says, into his techniques so that he doesn't have to control them via hand signals or by any thought. Basically, he just selects an opponent as the target, and those attacks follow the target until they connect or are destroyed. It does make me wonder. We see Choso standing in front of Kenjaku, and Kenjaku is just basically watching this dude like he's a test subject. You know, he's got his chin in his hand. He's just relaxing this entire fight. And Kenjaku just says, was there a point to all of those attacks? Choso, again, I want to point out the cuts on his forearms. Those are very important right now. He says, like Iso, elegantly, like Kechizo, freely. And he launches his hand like none other than Luffy from One Piece. I feel like this is Gege's little nod to Luffy here, with him
doing this. It's quite a funny attack to look at here, but it catches Kenjaku completely and utterly off guard here. He grabs Kenjaku by the scruff of his neck and launches him about, and I think this is actually the first attacks he's actually landed on Kenjaku here. Kenjaku tanks the attacks, and it doesn't seem to be that he uses any cursed spirits, not that we can see from these attacks landing. Choso then drags Kenjaku over towards him and launches a punch at him, screaming powerfully, quoting that he must be like Yuji. Just as the attack seemingly lands, we see that Kenjaku summoned a small cursed spirit in his hand to tank the attack, and he says smugly, "Are you done yet?" Honestly, bro, Kenjaku is one of the coldest villains in this series, and I actually is becoming one of my favorites from most series in general here. We see Choso getting all worked up again, saying, "How about this?" And again, he launches 4 more streams of piercing blood at Kenjaku, and he says, "I already told you the speed and power of that attack is far below par." But we see Choso saying tracking is just a canal, and we see that the piercing blood's catching up to Kenjaku, actually carrying compressed blood over to Kenjaku here, and it actually catches him off guard when Choso activates his supernova attack. But it's where we get the final and big bombshell for Kenjaku in this chapter. Kenjaku activates his own innate technique, and I want to be clear here, not Suguru's cursed technique. People seem to be getting confused between the two. We have Suguru's cursed technique of cursed manipulation, but then we don't know what other cursed techniques Kenjaku actually possesses other than being able to swap bodies here, and we finally get to see it in action. I've seen a lot of speculation over the past little couple of days here that Kenjaku's technique is something to do with gravity, and I am mostly inclined to believe this. I've seen so many theories about Kenjaku's technique being similar to Gojo's Limitless, because we can see that there is almost this ring, this little barrier around Kenjaku's feet, where all of these blood droplets have been forcibly brought down to the ground and decimated. And we know from past experiences that these supernova attacks aren't supposed to go down like this. They're supposed to be a buckshot, as Choso says, an attack of blood from all sides, but they were sent straight down, and we see Kenjaku just absolutely nonchalantly standing on top of this rock that is in a weird circular shape that is almost similar to Gojo, and we see that none of the attacks hit. So my theory on this is that Kenjaku possesses gravity manipulation. If sky manipulation can be a thing, and Gojo can affect space and time with his own techniques, warping the very physics of the world, it would make sense to me that a man like Kenjaku, who's basically a man of science in the Jujutsu sorcery world, has combined Jujutsu technique with the laws of physics for gravity here, creating some of the most powerful techniques that we've seen so far in the series. When we look at techniques that have combined themselves with natural physical laws, they are often ridiculously powerful. Sky manipulation, when used in the correct way, is incredibly powerful. Then we have Gojo's Limitless that affects space and time, and he is the most powerful in the series, and again, his technique meshes with space and time of the natural law and order for the universe. So it would make sense to me that Kenjaku uses gravity, a way of basically imbuing science into his Jujutsu sorcery, which is all he really is. It's a mad scientist. But then we see Kenjaku looking very disappointed with himself, saying shit. And Choso gets extremely excited, saying, "You finally used it. Something other than cursed spirit manipulation." And then the two are interrupted. "I might be an only child, but you're damn awesome, Oni-chan." And we see Yuki Tsukumo standing there, ready to join the battle, with the title "Information Gleaned from the Bonds of Brotherhood." Next up, Special Grade Tsukumo Yuki. And oh my god, what a chapter this has been. We finally get to see Kenjaku's technique. Yuki Tsukumo finally joins the battle.
Holy fucking shit, this chapter was insane. There is literally so much that I need to break down within this chapter. Yuki's ability reveal, Kenjaku is scared of Yuki, Kenjaku's domain expansion, then we have Tengen jumping in at the last panels to help Yuki with some sort of mastermind plan. There is a lot to cover within this chapter, and honestly, Gege's hands must be literally on fire right now, because holy fuck, this chapter went hard as fuck, bro. And I just said fuck a ridiculous amount of times. But before we get into the video, I just want to make sure that you are all liking, commenting, and subscribe on the channel if you do like the content that you see, and it will help you get more juicy manga content into your sub feeds. But without further ado, let's get into the video. The Choso fans, rejoice, your boy is living for another day here. Yuki enters the fight and tells Choso, "Nice
fight, leave the rest to me. She then somehow manipulates Tengen's barrier and transports Choso away so he can go and have himself a nice little snooze after a scrap with Kenjaku. Yuki then proceeds to tell Kenjaku that her type is a hard-working, muddy guy. And if this sounds familiar, it's because you'll have heard this similar sort of line from our favourite pervy gorilla, Todo, who asks Megami and Yuji what their type is in women. And if you remember, Todo did train under Yuki, which makes sense as to why Todo is such an absolute powerhouse when it comes to throwing hands. But Yuki then goes on to say to Kenjaku how he's different, and she'll have to beat him up to make him the same as her type. And we're gonna see in a moment, she proceeds to do just that. Yuki's a fucking monster. Kenjaku thinks to himself about when Yuki was given the title Special Grade designation, and he mentions how the administration should have had details on her ability. However, when he looked, he couldn't find anything about it. And crazy conspiracy theory time here, but I think this has something to do with Yuki herself. You see, Yuki is all about splitting away from cursed energy altogether. She said this already in the chapters, and we know this. So I could see a world where Yuki has gone to this library of information on special grades or just cases in general, and then has removed the information about her own technique. It seems fitting for a character that wants to split away from cursed energy that would do this entire thing to get rid of information regarding her technique. That's my crazy little conspiracy theory here. But then we see Kenjaku telling Yuki to keep her distance, and then he summons the special grade case that we saw him use at the White House to dispatch of the soldiers that Gary had sent for him. And the way the special grade appears, it just sort of crawls out of thin air, and it reminds me of the Garganters from Bleach, that the way the Urankers arrive to the battle. I have to say, like, it looks really phenomenally cool. I love stuff like that, the way it just sort of rips out of reality. But then Kenjaku goes to say how this case is a special grade from an Asian god. Now, this is the second time in the past few chapters that we've had a mention of god. Angel also mentioned this a while back, and I think Gege is doing this intentionally. If this world exists with cases and spirits, then it only makes sense to me that they must have come from somewhere, right? So if by chance they come from hell, there must be a god, right? And this is the second time that we've done this, and Kenjaku is definitely old enough and wise enough to have most likely run into a god at some point, right? But then he goes on to say how this case spirit, and I quote, can remove any obstacles. A special grade that can entangle a concept within its target's technique. From how I understand this, Kenjaku is basically saying as long as he can see a way to remove the obstacle, the case spirit can do it. I mean, we've seen stuff like this before with Takaba. Takaba can basically create anything into reality that he finds funny. So it's within reason that this special grade could also do something like this. Scary stuff. But not that scary after we see Yuki rolling up her curse technique into a ball after catching some footy fever and calling it by its name, Garuda. She then proceeds to blue lock the out of this thing and one-shot Kenjaku's cursed spirit with a kick so powerful that Kenjaku is sat there wondering what the fuck he's got himself into. Like, seriously, look at this man's face and tell me that that's a dude who wants to be in this fight right now. Yuki closes the distance and asks if Kenjaku is scared to close the distance because he doesn't know her technique. And then she reveals that her technique is actually mass. Right before sending this man Kenjaku on a one-way EasyJet flight to get land. Like, Yuki punches this man so fucking hard, he flies through the barrier and into the Shadow Realm. We see him looking up at his arms that are up. He realizes what she means when she says mass. Yuki's technique can add such overwhelming mass to the point that its concept cannot be contained semantically or pragmatically. She then explains how she can imbue virtual mass into either herself or her cursed spirit, which we then learn is actually a cursed tool. And the technique is called Bombardier, as in Bombardier get fucked. This chapter is fucking wild. So for all of you guys doubting whether Yuki actually fits special grade criteria, that little floating case tool there is enough to nuke a country should she add enough mass to it. She could literally launch that thing at a city and it's bye-bye city. Come on now, that's enough to be special grade right there. Kenjaku then goes on to note that she didn't also get slowed by adding that much mass to herself, meaning her curse technique literally defies concepts and laws of physics, like pretty much anything else in the series right now. But he also states that none of his high-grade case spirits he has left after Shibuya are usable against her, and then we see Kenjaku beginning to doubt whether he alone is enough to hunt this beast of a woman, Yuki. Nowhere in any of these chapters coming up did I ever think I was going to see Kenjaku, the main villain of the series, literally fearing for his fucking life. But this dude is in shambles right now, and I'm all for it. Yuki then starts to deduce Kenjaku's technique, and we get some more clarification on just how many techniques he actually has. Yuki deduces that the technique he used against Choso was gravity to defend himself. So right now in total he has about 3 techniques that we know of. He has curse manipulation, he has gravity, and then he has the body hopping technique, which he's used to survive for all these years. The curse manipulation Uzumaki allows him to extract curse techniques, but they only get to be used once? I think I'm reading that correctly, I hope I am. But he can't be using idle transfiguration, which has already been revealed to her. We see her figuring out that Kenjaku may have absorbed more techniques via Uzumaki, but it's unlikely because he doesn't have an external storage for techniques like Yuta does. Which is also something I'm not sure we knew about Rika, who apparently stores Akatsu's techniques for him, and that's how he copies them. Very, very interesting bit of lore behind Yuta right there. I kind of enjoy that one. Yuta's obviously my favourite, as you can tell by the PFP, and I'm a bit biased towards Yuta. But then we get this panel of both Yuki and Kenjaku saying how much of a pain it is for them to be fighting each other, after him saying that Yuki may have an extension technique as her trump card. But right now we are in this little stalemate of trying to figure out their true abilities and what they can both do. But Yuki goes back to the plan that her and Tengen have made against Kenjaku to try and force him to use his domain, and in the after effects of him using it, where his techniques are going to be harder to use for him, she'll still have Garuda to win the fight, even if she is in the same state as Kenjaku after that. But I also find this very interesting. I wonder if Garuda can work the same way Rika does, where it can act independently from Yuki and fight on its own, which, if that is the case, that makes Yuki an entirely separate beast. Imagine Yuki using her mass technique to try and fight you, and then you have to worry about this weird little snake creature also launching at you at extreme speeds with incredible mass behind it. It's kind of a difficult fight to take. But this is where we see Kenjaku interrupting Yuki's thoughts here by forming a hand signal and saying, no, our curse techniques aren't suited for fighting each other, but you still haven't expanded your domain, which is practically confessing to me that in a battle of domains, you're not confident in your ability to win. And that is where we see Kenjaku using his domain expansion, all enveloping Garba Hadhatu, which this massive, grotesque looking tree seemingly filled with cursed spirits just appears out of the floor. And I also want to point out that this domain seems very, very similar to Sukuna's in the fact that it doesn't create its own void, it doesn't create its own space where the user and the opponent is trapped inside, but rather it's more akin to an artist just painting it on a canvas and he's bringing it into the real world where it's interactable with everyone else. But after seeing this, we see Yuki then shout for Tengen, who wonders if she's going to make it in time. We also see her making a hand seal of some sort for some sort of technique, and if I had to take a wild guess here, I would assume that it's a technique that is going to try and seal Kenjaku in his weakened form from the domain, as obviously we know that whenever someone uses a domain, their normal techniques then become weaker, or it becomes harder for them to use cursed energy, unless you're an absolute unit like Gojo who can use that shit multiple times in a day.
So chapter 206 of Jujutsu Kaisen has just dropped, and it shows us its flashback between Yuki and Tengen, and they're basically talking about how they're going to dismantle Kenjaku's domain. And if you remember in the last chapter there, Yuki and Kenjaku were fighting and it was getting quite intense, and Yuki had somehow managed to push Kenjaku to the point where he needed to use his domain expansion. It was looking like it was going to be curtains for Yuki here, but in this flashback we're seeing that Yuki and Tengen are formulating a plan for Tengen to be able to dismantle his barrier here. Tengen goes on to say that each room that where they are is the Sun Yata barrier. Now this is explained a little bit more, because for the past couple of chapters I've been wondering what's going on with this barrier, how people are just walking in between it, and I'm glad Gege has actually explained this, because there's been multiple times here where I'm like, okay, Tengen manipulated this barrier, then it looks like Yuki manipulated it, now it looks like Kenjaku manipulated it, and I wasn't quite sure who was the owner of the barrier and who it was that was like commanding it this way basically, but it turns out it's actually Tengen's barrier and it is there permanently. And he states that anyone skilled with barrier techniques can configure its structure to some extent. So basically Sunyata barrier acts as this barrier that is in every room of the Star Tomb basically, and it can be manipulated to create another another space, which explains how Kenjaku and Choso ended up in a theater room. It's a bit of a weird barrier to have when you're trying to create a safe space for yourself, or I guess it kind of works here because it did delay Kenjaku from getting to Tengen sooner with him distracting Choso with a theater. It's a bit of a weird one, but there's a bit of an explanation here where it says Sunyata is a Buddhist concept of emptiness, which all things are ultimately made out of, which is kind of useful and makes more sense now that I'm seeing it, but I'm glad that this barrier has actually been explained. But we go on to Yuki and Tengen talking about how that type of barrier would be bad for them, and Tengen explains that the important thing is that Kenjaku thinks that he needs to think that we're comfortable in here and that he has the upper hand in this space. That way he'll stay within the barrier. And Tengen then goes on to say that ultimately the Sunyata barrier is mine, and that's why we start the fight inside the barrier and get him to use his domain expansion. And this is all in an effort so that once Kenjaku uses his domain here, Tengen will be able to gather all the information that they need in order to dismantle Kenjaku's barrier. In the last video that I done of this, and the spoilers, I saw that Kenjaku's barrier was slowly disappearing, and now I speculated that it might have been usage of his ability, and he only had certain amount of hits to use in that, and that was my speculation on it, but it turns out that's actually just Tengen dismantling the barrier, dismantling the domain, should I say. But there is also another reference here to Reggie Star from the Culling games. Tengen then does say to counter Kenjaku's domain, you might elect to use either a simple domain or hollow wicker basket to preserve his curse technique. Now, I was under the impression that hollow wicker basket was actually just Reggie's own technique and was basically like a storage unit for his own receipt technique. I wasn't aware that this was a technique that predates and uses everyone, or maybe Reggie was the inventor of that technique. I don't know, but it is a bit of a wild one. Tengen then goes on to say that he said it many times, Kenjaku is one of the exceedingly few sorcerers that can match me on barrier techniques. Even his simple domain isn't on the same level of that of other sorcerers. And then he goes on to say to get Kenjaku to expand his domain so he can dismantle it, and then in the time his curse technique is burnt out, Yuki will beat him up, basically. And then at the end of all this, it comes up and it says miscalculation. And we cut back to Kenjaku using his domain expansion here. And Tengen looks visibly shocked by this because he says that this domain is like the one Sukuna showed in Shibuya. He says expanding a domain and activating his curse technique in an unclosed barrier, an amazing feat. The exterior that needs to be dismantled doesn't exist. And Yuki then goes on to activate his simple domain here. And because Kenjaku's barrier is so strong, it is literally ripping apart the simple domain that Yuki has summoned here. It is having no effect. Kenjaku is basically laughing the shit off. He basically just says, did you really think something of that level could stand with my domain? Yuki is kind of panicking here as she's running towards Kenjaku with this domain, and this simple domain is crumbling behind her very, very fast. Now, I also want to notice something here. Someone in my comments said that why did Yuki choose to run towards Kenjaku and leave the simple domain? It's not that she's leaving the simple domain here. The simple domain is actually following her, but because of Kenjaku's domain, it's actually just being ripped apart. Quite interesting to see. I was also under the impression that a simple domain was standstill, similar to Miwa's. That was how I had it down, but apparently not. But then we see Kenjaku's domain starting to disintegrate basically off Tengen's magic here. And Tengen is saying that treating the edge of the short hit effects range as the exterior together with my Sunyata barrier, I will erase it. Tengen is again doing these Naruto hand signs and stuff like that. He is ready for it. Kenjaku then goes on to say, Tengen, I am not the same as you. I have lived through this 1,000-year tug of war between feuding giants and the capricious alliances and betrayals of this world of curses. Like, this is the most lively we've seen Kenjaku in the series, I think. Like, he's truly enjoying himself here. He's a man of absolute chaos. He's really, really enjoying himself here. And as Yuki just about makes it to Kenjaku again uses his gravity technique and absolutely pummels her. And as he does this, Kenjaku's barrier seemingly reaches its limit and he ends up falling through the Sunyata barrier. What I said in the previous spoiler video here, I was kind of correct in my assumption. I said that when Kenjaku would hit this attack, he ends up falling through the barrier, and then in the next panel his domain actually disappears, and I assumed it was because the domain didn't have anything to sit on, and that looks to be the case here, as Kenjaku basically falls through the barrier of the Sunyata barrier, and then because the domain doesn't have that barrier to sit upon anymore, it just disintegrates basically. And Kenjaku says, you dismantle my my domain together with the Sunyata barrier. You really are stubborn as you are old. As he falls to like the lower floors here, which I'm assuming is the maze that Tengen is talking about in the beginning of the episode, in the beginning of the chapter here. Stairs and winding place. It reminds me of that art piece with all the stairs going into random places. That's what it kind of reminds me of. But Kenjaku falls to the floor here nice and gracefully, and we see Yuki is absolutely battered and bruised on the floor here. Her arm is completely mangled up. She is done skis for that arm right there. And then we get this really interesting bit here with Kenjaku saying, if you'd at least used your own domain against mine, the result wouldn't have been this boring. And then he goes on to say, well, it's your fault for trusting that thing. Tengen has kept something important from you all. The Culling games. And then he doesn't get to finish the sentence. He was about to reveal something major about Tengen here that we're not sure what it could be. And honestly, I have no idea what the speculation is on this. I will say, throughout the series so far, I have had this sort of uneasiness about Tengen. While Tengen is supposed to be this sort of otherworldly, godly figure type who's created this barrier and is protecting humanity and Jujutsu sorcerers alike, he is very close to a cursed spirit, and there has been hints in the conversations that he's had without Yuki about the humanity just slowly disappearing, and the longer he stays alive, basically the more cursed spirit he becomes, and that's why Kenjaku is trying to absorb him, and that's why it'd be so easy for Kenjaku to absorb him here. This kind of sentence here from Kenjaku makes me very, very curious as to what the future holds for Tengen. What kind of secret is Tengen holding here? Well, I mean, we know that guy was literally just holding onto the back of the prison realm here. He just held onto that for safekeeping, I guess. So there's definitely some sort of secret and something major that Tengen is holding. I am very, very curious to see where it is at. In the back of my mind now, I've been thinking that we're sort of closing in on the end of Jujutsu Kaisen here, but the more chapters that come out, the more I'm starting to think that maybe we're not. Maybe there's a lot more to this story, and maybe Kenjaku isn't the final boss in this story here. Moving on, Kenjaku notices that Yuki's Shikigami didn't disappear at all. In fact, Garuda is still alive and very, very healthy, getting ready to attack Kenjaku. And Yuki turns up behind Kenjaku, standing up, very bloodied and very battered and bruised. And as he turns around to face her, Garuda flies at Kenjaku and attempts to attack him. Kenjaku ends up managing to dodge here, and he says she's still conscious, but she's not in a position to move freely. Reverse curse technique, it's likely that she can use that. And then Kenjaku summarizes that she's probably utilizing the Shikigami in order to buy time to heal up, and that's fine. I'll use this time to recover my curse technique also, but he would be entirely fucking wrong in that assumption, because we get one of the coldest panels in the series so far. Like I said it in my previous spoiler video, but Yuki's only had this one major fight, and in this one major fight she's had two of the coldest panels appear in this series. This panel right here where she's about to kick Kenjaku is cold as fuck. Like, her arm is mangled up, her face is covered in blood, and we just see this piercing white eye staring Kenjaku down, and Kenjaku looks visibly shook by this. He manages to block this kick, and he literally thinks to himself, heal yourself. And Yuki must also know what he is thinking here, and she smiles like a psychopath and just says hell no, and continues to just throw flurries of kicks at this dude with no hesitation or regard for her own safety at all. With her and Garuda basically tag teaming this dude and taking major hits, she ends up landing a few good kicks on her here before she ends up reaching her limit and spewing up blood and sort of half collapsing to the floor. Kenjaku then says, you're at your limit, and I suppose you wanted to catch me off guard, but you should have used your brain a little first. And then Yuki then interrupts him and says, did you forget? I like a man who's hard working and muddy. Choso fans, again, you guys are eating good right now. Rejoice, because your boy is back and he's about to drop something nuclear on this dude. It looks like he is charging up a piercing blood. We see it like sort of condensed there basically between his hands, and the title is An Older Brother Lies in Ambush. He aims his attack with determination, and Kenjaku is shook, man. He's ready to, I think he's about to get his shit pushed in here. I don't think there's much that Kenjaku has underneath his sleeve here that might be able to stop this attack. Whether he's able to resist this, I don't know. This chapter is, I feel like in the next week in 207, someone's gonna die, and it's either gonna be Kenjaku or it's gonna be Choso or even Yuki. It's not looking good for anyone involved in this fight right now.
And Kenjaku has been playing us for a fool. I don't know about you, but I deadass thought Yuki and Choso, with a little help from Tengen, were gonna take the win in this fight, but that is just simply not happening at all. Chapter opens up with Choso rejoining the fray after a quick little power nap, and if you need a refresher, Choso stepped up to the plate first to fight Kenjaku in a one-on-one effort in an attempt to draw out his technique and his domain, and that didn't quite go according to plan, and Choso ended up getting his ass whooped, and that's where Yuki steps in and tags Choso out in order to fight with Kenjaku, and in doing so, she actually managed to land the most amount of damage we've seen anyone do so far in the series. But Choso is back, and we learn that their original plan of Choso fighting one-on-one with Kenjaku is somewhat of a ruse. We learn that Choso is actually supposed to lose the fight with Kenjaku so that he'll believe he's fighting Yuki in a quote-unquote one-on-one fight, so then he'll be more inclined to use his domain against Yuki. And with Choso defeated and out of the picture, which is what we saw in the previous chapters, Yuki can then pressure Kenjaku to the point where he actually needs to use his domain expansion, with Yuki intentionally holding off her own domain and instead opting to use a simple domain under the plan with Tengen, so Tengen could then dismantle Kenjaku's domain before he could do any real damage with it. Because if I'm not mistaken, we didn't actually see the powers of Kenjaku's domain or the effects of it, because the attack that he used to crush Yuki was gravity manipulation. Also, by the way, take a shot every time I just said domain. Good lord, you're in for a good Friday if you do that. But back to Choso reappearing behind Kenjaku, we see Choso getting ready to fire a piercing blood. Kenjaku is essentially held in place by Garuda, with Yuki adding weight to it to keep him in place. Choso then comes out with the sickest line he's ever been given. It's parent killing time. And if I'm honest, that is the funniest line I've ever seen Choso say for so many reasons, but the main one is that Choso always has been the serious, brooding type of character. So to see him come out with something like this was wild, but also it seems a bit out of character, and if I'm honest and I'm putting on my conspiracy theory hat here, I would say that Choso isn't actually the real Choso, and instead he was a fake swapped out somewhere when he was sent away by Yuki in the previous chapters. However, I have zero basis for the statement, so it's just me being a crazy conspiracy theorist. But Choso ends up landing the piercing blood, and it ends up knocking Kenjaku's weird little skull cap off the top of his noggin, and this is where we see Choso and Yuki's reaction to Kenny's little brainlet sat in Geto's pilot seat here. And we have to remember that no one outside of the disaster cases and Gojo have seen Kenjaku's brain like this, and they have no idea that this is basically Kenjaku's true form. But we see Kenjaku is basically a fan of Mike Tyson. He used a boxing head movement to mitigate that damage that was caused from the piercing blood, turning his head as the piercing blood hits, allowing his freaky little skull cap to spin around on his noggin. Yuki, wasting absolutely zero time, moves in, giving Kenjaku no time to recover, and starts landing heavy kicks on his chin. But just before that happens, Kenjaku manages to sew his noggin back together as the kick lands, and we see him acknowledging because of the output from Bombia being weakened due to Yuki's injury. Remember, in the previous chapter, she got her arm mangled up. That attack might have done more damage and been more dangerous for him. Now, I'm not sure if Kenjaku is talking about the piercing blood that landed or the kick that landed, and I'm assuming that it's due to the kick that landed and not the piercing blood, purely because he's already pulled his head back together after the piercing blood by the time the kick lands. So I'm assuming that he is talking about Yuki's kick here. But right after that, Yuki is also thinking to herself that she must have Kenjaku cornered for him to resort to tricks like this, which only boosts her confidence in this fight, and we can see her visibly starting to pull ahead a little bit in this fight. Yuki and Choso proceed to jump Kenny's ass, landing all sorts of hits and combos on this man. And I also want to point out that Kenjaku is taking this beating and managing to block / deflect some of these blows, while even being weighed down and slightly strained due to Garuda being wrapped around him. But Choso tells Yuki to heal up, and he also mentions how we have got to recover Bombier's output, which, as Kenjaku mentioned, is weaker due to Yuki's injuries, because obviously she just had her arm mangled in the previous chapter, which we see her healing her arm with reverse curse technique. And I've seen a few people talking about how this feels like an ass pull, and I have to disagree. I feel as if reverse curse technique now is almost a staple of becoming a high-level Jujutsu sorcerer, and now at this point in the series, it doesn't surprise me that someone of a high level or as a special grade knows how to use it. I feel like it's just become a common thing. In my opinion, it makes sense and doesn't feel like an ass pull. But that being said, Yuki manages to heal her arm, and as she's healing her arm, Kenjaku manages to escape from Garuda due to her technique being even weaker, with her focusing on healing herself. And again, Kenjaku shows more reasons as to why he should not be underestimated. And I have to admit, I am truly guilty of underestimating this man. Like, I need to put put more respect on this man's name, because in a previous video where I was ranking all the special grades, you should go check that out, by the way, I placed him in number 5, and honestly, I'm gonna have to go back and reconfig that video, because the man's pulling ahead here, and he definitely needs to be a little bit higher up, and I kind of fucked up on that video, I'm not gonna lie. But with Yuki now having healed herself, she uses Garuda to destroy the surrounding area, and she's using it like a whip. It's honestly really interesting to see just how many ways she can use this thing. We've seen it use it as a bowling ball, almost like a sword, and now a whip. I wouldn't mind seeing it use as a spear or like a bow staff next, but the way she's using it is very phenomenal. But Yuki and Choso end up taking advantage of the dust cloud that is created by Yuki to close in and potentially land some critical hits on Kenjaku, which is where Kenjaku flips the switch on this battle. From here on out, this is Kenjaku's fight, and we learn why Kenjaku has survived for so long. Kenjaku's gravity technique finally comes back to him, and he activates it almost instantly, disarming Garuda and Choso, and Yuki ends up deducing that Kenjaku's gravity manipulation lasts around 6 seconds and can be used over the space of about 2 to 3 meters. And I'm not sure if it's Kenjaku's technique running out, but somehow Yuki manages to pull Garuda from underneath the gravity, manages to swing an attack at Kenjaku, but the attack narrowly grazes Kenjaku, and he ends up summoning a chaos spirit, as we see Yuki figuring out that Kenjaku was really just a boss battle in a game right here. Kenjaku will use gravity manipulation for 6 seconds over an area of 2 to 3 meters, and then once that technique is used and is recharging, he'll fill that space with chaos manipulation spirits, which, as Yuki mentions, the chaos spirits are nothing but fodder to hit. And again, Yuki's confidence starts to grow for the second time in this chapter. She's now starting to believe that she can win. Yuki once again attacks Kenjaku as she is breaking down a plan of action inside of her own head, which is where we see Kenjaku again flipping the tables on Yuki. He seemingly catches her attack, and we see a miniature Uzumaki above Kenjaku's hand, and he blasts it into Yuki's face. And honestly, I did not expect Kenjaku to pull out a miniature Uzumaki. Like, honestly, I thought at some point he would use the technique of Uzumaki to absorb Tengen, but not in this way, and it's a complete and utter surprise to Yuki. But honestly, it shouldn't be a surprise to the reader. We probably should have seen something like this coming, considering just how strong Kenjaku is overall right now. So I'm surprised, but also it's caught me off guard, the application of it. I wasn't expecting a miniature Uzumaki. I was expecting Uzumaki, but just not in this form, basically. But it also doesn't stop there. Giving credit where credit is due, Yuki manages to tank the first Uzumaki blast, but as she has her hands up and is guarding from that first blast, Kenjaku dips underneath that guard, again, boxing style, and uses a second Uzumaki. That's 2 Uzumaki in the space of seconds. The blast rips through Yuki's stomach, with Kenjaku adding to the fact that Yuki's weight doesn't change when she uses Bombardier, so even if the density changes, her durability doesn't change. But we see Yuki with a massive hole in her stomach, and I gotta say, it's not looking good for our girl Yuki right here, because this will be an intentional hit from Kenjaku, because as we know, sorcerers basically need their bellies to summon cursed energy. That's where it comes from, as it was explained by Todo, and if the belly isn't there, I can't really summon that cursed energy anymore, so I don't know how Yuki's gonna survive this, and if I'm honest, I don't think she does. Overall, this chapter went absolutely nutty. Again, Gege went on a break, come away, dropping heat. Solid 8 out of 10 for me. But I want to hear from you guys. Let me know your thoughts down below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, as it does help the channel grow. And if you want to support me even further, consider becoming a member for some extra juicy benefits. But that is everything from me. Much love, big kisses. I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Peace.